Hello, my name is Michael Fuller and I teach in the field of science and religion at New College in the University of Edinburgh. This has been a rapidly growing field in recent years, and there are, I suppose, two main thrusts to the way in which we approach it. The first you'll probably not find surprising. When people think about science and religion, they often assume that these two aspects of human experience are, in some sense, opposed to one another. It's what's been dubbed the conflict thesis, even the conflict myth in recent years. It tends to take particular understandings of what those words, science and religion, might mean, and observe that those understandings might disagree about some issue or another. The story told by science about the origins of the universe, for example, is different to the account of the creation in the Judeo-Christian scriptures. It also invites us to consider philosophical questions about what we mean by science and by religion, and what we mean when we use the word evidence in support of views derived from these perspectives. These are not straightforward questions, and it's fascinating to explore them further. This antagonistic attitude also tends to assume that science and religion are, and always have been, single things which we can talk about in monolithic terms. But of course, they're not. They're words with their own history in Western culture, which have meant subtly different things at different stages in the unfolding of that culture. One historian has pointed out that you can't look at a map of the Middle East, drawn around the year 1600, say, and expect to see Israel and Egypt on it. The territory now occupied by those countries was there, of course, but in those days they were both part of the Ottoman Empire. In the same way, we can't look to the past and find science and religion there in the modern senses of those words. To take an example of what this means, Galileo wasn't a scientist. He couldn't have been, because the word scientist wasn't coined until the 1830s, long after he had died. He would have considered himself to be a natural philosopher. So we unpack these sorts of considerations. How often are we guilty of misunderstanding the past by projecting back onto it our modern day perceptions and prejudices? It's fascinating to investigate how this perception of opposition has arisen in the first place. Who has promoted the idea, and to what ends? It turns out that this is a fascinating and very complex story, that it owes as much to social and political considerations as it does to scientific and religious ones. So these are one set of questions that we explore. How should we understand texts and data, what we might think of as the raw materials of religion and science? What do we understand by those words, science and religion? What are the historical processes by which we've come to understand these words in the particular ways in which we now do? And what are the origins of the conflict thesis? How has it been promoted? By whom? And to what ends? So that's the first thrust of our approach to science and religion. The second thrust is to say, well, look, if these two aspects of human experience are not, in fact, necessarily in a state of conflict, then how might they mutually inform one another? Can the sciences offer us any insights on the way in which God might interact with the world, for example? Can they offer us new sources of metaphor and analogy to aid us in our thinking about God? And conversely, we might ask, can religions have a role to play in aiding humans to understand better the challenges raised by scientific and technical progress? Challenges such as those of climate change, for example. Again, science can offer us all kinds of new courses of action in our world, but just because we can do them, should we do them? So can religions have an input into debates around genetic modification, for example? We may all feel quite happy about genetically modifying plants so as to increase the yield of crops, for example, though some would urge that there are dangers associated even with that. But what about genetically engineering animals? Perhaps to provide organs for transplantation into humans? What about experimentation on human embryos? What about genetically modifying ourselves? Is this the pathway to a disease-free future in which human beings live indefinitely long lives, as some trans and post-humanists urge? Or is it simply a step too far, which is likely to cause, at the very least, a stratification of society, and at worst, an unpredictable, dystopic future? So here are a second set of questions that we explore. How might the sciences inform our theological thinking? And conversely, how might theological thinking inform challenges arising from science and technology? And how might we consider questions around human futures from both scientific and religious angles? Well, we can't answer all these questions, of course. Indeed, many of them don't have straightforward answers. But in the course of studying science and religion at New College, we can, I hope, learn to explore complex issues in such a way as to enable us to frame new and better questions. And that, I think, is what the study of science and the study of religion is really all about. Thank you.